If you have ADHD, you probably know the feeling I'm about to describe, because Lord knows I do. So let's picture it together. You have something very important to do. Maybe it's replying to emails, or starting an assignment, or cleaning the kitchen, or paying a bill. Heck, it may be something that you actually quite want to do. You even fully intend on doing it, but somehow you just don't move. Instead, you sit there, maybe doom scrolling, maybe staring at the task, maybe doing literally anything else but what you need to be doing. And the whole time your brain is saying, why can't I just do it? There might be guilt in your stomach and you might be feeling really stressed out about it. If this happens to you, I want to start with something very important. You're not lazy, and you're definitely not the only one. This experience has a name: ADHD task paralysis. And today we're going to talk about it together. We will be covering why task paralysis happens in ADHD, why it's not a character flaw, and 3 different gentle strategies that maybe can help you get unstuck without beating yourself up. If you've ever felt trapped between wanting to start something and being completely unable to start it, this video is for you, and my heart goes out to you as well. Hello and welcome or welcome back to Unwinding Minds. If you are new here, hi, it's nice to meet you. I'm Rosie. I'm a chronically ill counsellor based in the UK who specialises in supporting people who are disabled, who are neurodiverse, and who are chronically ill in order to manage their mental health the best that they possibly can. I also make these videos as a supplement to offering private counselling services, and that's to support the wider community, including those who cannot access counselling at this time with a professional like myself. It is very important to state, however, and I do at the start of every video now, that these videos are not a substitute for counselling. They are only intended to support with psychoeducation. So let's just briefly talk about what task paralysis feels like. Task paralysis is that strange moment where your brain and your body seem to just be disconnected on what you're supposed to be doing. Your brain might say, start the task, do the thing, but your body doesn't necessarily want to move. And there's a few different reasons why this can happen. Sometimes it's because the task feels overwhelming, or it's because it feels boring. That's another one. Sometimes it's because there are too many steps and your brain just doesn't know where to begin. You might find yourself in the peculiar position of starting a different task just so that you don't have to tackle the thing that you really should be doing or that you really need to get done. Suddenly, your brain wants to do everything except that task. Suddenly the floor needs vacuuming, or you need a snack, or maybe you should research something random. Maybe you should start to clean your room instead. And meanwhile, the task that you're trying to start becomes heavier and heavier in your mind as you avoid it. It doesn't go anywhere, it just sits there. To understand task paralysis and why we get these mental traffic jams, we have to talk about something called executive function, or in this case, executive dysfunctioning. Executive functioning skills are the mental skills that help you to do all sorts of things like the following: starting tasks, that's a big one, planning steps, prioritizing, that again, very important, and shifting attention as well as another component, and finally, regulating motivation. These skills are heavily connected to the brain's dopamine system, which works a bit differently in people with ADHD as opposed to their non-ADHD or neurotypical counterparts. And I am going to bore you with a little bit of basic neuroscience here. In the ADHD brain, dopamine regulation systems tend to have lower baseline dopamine availability and altered dopamine transporter receptor activity, which can reduce signaling in brain networks involved in motivation, in reward processing, and, you guessed it, executive function. As a result, people with ADHD often require stronger or more immediate stimulational rewards to activate those circuits as compared to a neurotypical brain. And that affects attention, impulse control, and task persistence. So let's talk about some of the biggest reasons that task paralysis shows up, because it's important that we understand it. 1. The brain can't find a starting point. Many tasks are actually made up of dozens of tiny steps. For example, clean the kitchen sounds very simple, so neat and tidy, and that will only take 10 minutes, right? But it's not one task, because that actually means clear off the counters and unload the dishwasher. It means wash the dishes if they haven't been washed, or wiping the surfaces, or taking out the rubbish, putting things away. It's a lot of tasks folded into one. For many ADHD brains, when a task isn't clearly broken down, the brain just struggles to decide, what the heck do I do first? So instead of choosing a step, the brain just stalls completely. It's like opening a computer program that just never finishes loading. Have you ever seen it when you get that spinning beach ball of doom? That's what we always used to call it. Well, that's essentially what's happening inside of your brain. So another thing to consider is overwhelm, which freezes the system. ADHD brains often also experience emotional overwhelm more quickly than neurotypical counterparts. When a task feels too big, too important, or too stressful, the brain might shift into something similar to a freeze response, instead of fighting or flight, etc. This is when your nervous system chooses to freeze completely. This is especially common when the task has the following traits. If there are high expectations associated with it, if there is an existing fear of failure, or if there are a lot of unknown steps. Your brain isn't necessarily refusing the task. Really, the intention is to try and protect you from what it perceives as a threat. That's why the autonomic nervous system kicks in. 3. Dopamine and motivation timing. ADHD brains tend to struggle with motivation that isn't immediate. This is often referred to as difficulties with delayed gratification. There is a pretty famous study using marshmallows that demonstrates the effects of having difficulties with delayed gratification. So, let me know if you do want me to talk about that in a separate video, because I happily will. But let's get back to the topic at hand, though. Tasks that are boring or repetitive or slow or low reward, or have long-term payoffs but no immediate results, are simply harder to get started on. To be crystal clear, this doesn't mean that you don't care. It means that your brain's motivation chemistry isn't actually firing yet when you start a task. Often ADHD motivation works in 4 main modes: interest, urgency, novelty, and challenge. If a task has none of those things, or not enough of them, the brain, it just struggles to get started. 4. Perfectionism. Yes, really. I know that this surprises some folks, because an outsider might just see the chaos on the surface and not what is happening underneath the hood. A lot of people with ADHD develop hidden perfectionism. I see it all the time in my counselling work with ADHDers. They have often been told repeatedly in their life that they are failures or that they are lazy, and that is incredibly demotivating, and it pushes people towards trying to get things done perfectly instead of good enough, because the whole perception of good enough becomes totally skewed over time. You might think thoughts like, if I can't do it properly, then what's the point? I'm just going to screw this up. Great way to motivate yourself to start, huh? So starting a task becomes dangerous. I mentioned earlier that motivation is a part of executive functioning, and motivation is tied to the reward systems in our brains. Because starting means risking making mistakes, the brain can interpret starting the task as kind of a threat. If it never gets done though, brilliant. I have maintained my sense of safety, and now there are maggots in my bin bags. Yuck. I have an important reminder that I do want to share at this stage. Before we really talk about strategies to cope, I do want us to pause together. If task paralysis is something that you deal with regularly, please try to hear me when I say this. Your brain isn't fighting you. It's trying very hard to manage overwhelm, uncertainty, and motivation using the tools that it has. Each of us is equipped with different tools for coping with life's challenges. The good news is that you can always add to your tool belt. And the goal isn't forcing your brain to behave like a neurotypical or non-ADHD brain. Accepting your brain is a good start to figuring out ways to resist it a little less. The goal is working with how your brain actually functions, after all. Forcing yourself to change is rarely effective and frequently causes burnout and misery, from what I've observed. So let's talk about 3 different strategies that help many ADHD brains get unstuck when they're struggling with task paralysis. Strategy 1 is shrink the starting line. One of the most powerful ways, I think, to break task paralysis is to make the first step almost ridiculously small and easy. You're not doing the whole task, just starting the first motion of it. So what does that look like? Let's think about some examples. Instead of write the essay, which is huge, the first step might be open up a document. Or it might be something like write the first sentence. That's it. Or instead of clean the living room, try pick up one thing. Just one. Why does this work well for many people? Well, it's because people with ADHD often really struggle with task initiation, not necessarily task completion. Once the brain is in motion, momentum can take over. This is sometimes called activation energy. The start is the hardest part, partly because it requires the most energy for the least amount of reward in an immediate sense. But once the ball is rolling, it's often easier to keep going. So we lower the barrier until it feels safe. You might even try what I call the 5-minute start. You can tell yourself, I'm only doing this for 5 minutes. Not finishing it, I'm not completing it, I'm not doing it perfectly. Just 5 minutes of starting. Many times, once those first few minutes pass, you'll naturally continue. And if you don't, that's okay too. You still broke the paralysis loop, and that's an important part when you are trying to reform your habits or form a new one. It gives you a chance to form a new neural pathway, and it gives you evidence that you actually can do it. So we'll move on to strategy 2, which is externalizing the task. ADHD brains often struggle to hold complex task structures inside working memory. That was a lot of waffle, but what that means is a task stays in your head, and it can feel a bit like a tangled knot. One of the most helpful things you can do is move the task out of your brain and into the physical world if this happens to you. This makes it visual and easier to subdivide or to keep track of. That could look like writing the steps on paper, or using a whiteboard, or making a checklist or mind map. It might mean putting sticky notes on your desk. But the key step is this: write the steps smaller than you think you need to. Instead of prepare a presentation for work, perhaps it would be wiser and a little gentler to try opening the slides, or title the slides, or select 3 bullet points for what you want to talk about in the presentation, or add 3 images to a document, and then you can review it at the end. This reduces overwhelm dramatically. Some people even find it helpful to physically cross out steps or move sticky notes. This creates small dopamine hits as you move through the task. Your brain gets proof of progress. It sees progress is happening, and that, again, it rewards your brain. Strategy number 3 is borrowing momentum. One of the most underrated ADHD tools, I think, is the external momentum. Sometimes your brain simply can't start alone, but it might be able to start with someone else present. This is often called body doubling. There are so many ways of doing this, and you may have already done it without even realizing, because it could look like studying in a group with some friends, or perhaps Co-working on Zoom, that's quite common these days, isn't it? It could be sitting in a cafe surrounded by lots of strangers, or working quietly in the same room as somebody else. Nothing special has to happen when you're doing this. Just the presence of another person or a group of people can help your brain to stay more engaged on task. A lot of people ask why that is, and it's because it adds the following: gentle accountability, it adds environmental structure, and it also adds social stimulation. Your brain suddenly has more signals that say to you, this is a work moment, and the activation barrier can, for some people, drop as a result. Even virtual body doubling sessions can be incredibly effective. There are a lot of these online, so I'd advise you giving it a go. Have a look around. If you've never tried it, it's possible that it could be a real eureka moment and make a big difference to how well you can stay on task. If you struggle with task paralysis, I want to leave you with this. ADHD brains are incredibly creative and capable. They often do incredible work on things that they are passionate about. And once you're started, you can be absolutely unstoppable. The frustration you may feel with yourself for struggling, that is a sign from your body that you are not necessarily working to support it as it is. I know it can be really easy to compare notes with other people, to see their results and to wish that you could just do things the same way that they do them. But comparison is the thief of joy. It's not very compassionate to sit and tell yourself that because you need different tools, that you are somehow lesser. It's not laziness, babes. Your brain literally works differently. Maybe yours is a brain that wants to move, but hasn't found the ignition source yet. And finding that ignition, it's a bit of an art form. Counselling can be really useful for difficulties with task initiation or decision paralysis, because you can work with another person and regularly check in to see what is and isn't working well for you. I have just so many other strategies that I use to support clients who are struggling with this, and some of them are highly tailored and individualistic, because that's often really useful for making sustainable changes that actually stick. I love working with people who are stuck in task paralysis. Strange as that might sound. If you take nothing away from this video though, other than this, it's this. Please be gentle with yourself in the process. You don't have to do things perfectly. You can just do a little, and it will improve your quality of life if you do. If you've made it this far, please know that I'm very grateful to you. If this episode has resonated with you, please take a second to like it, subscribe, share it with somebody else, all of the YouTube things. The thing is, you never know, it might help somebody else too. So if you want to make a huge difference to other people's lives, that's one way you could do it. We make a lot of videos about chronic illness, disability, neurodivergence, and mental health on this channel. And I'm always really interested to hear what it is that people want to see more of. So if you have any thoughts or questions after this video, please put them down in the comments below. And check the description if you are interested in working with me on a one-to-one basis around managing your ADHD or task paralysis, as I do also offer private counselling, and I love my job. Thank you so much for watching, and take really good care.